Welcome to APA's 14th Town Hall on COVID. My name is Billy Zidek, APA Standards and Codes Administrator. Allow me to review a couple of housekeeping items before we start. All attendees are in listen-only mode. We ask that you utilize the chat box for the Q&A segment of this session. While we attempt to respond to all questions submitted, should we run out of time, responses will be posted to APA's COVID-19 RAQ Recently Asked Questions webpage. We also remind participants to ensure their speaker volume level is set for your comfort. Our speakers are gathering us from across the continent, and as such, varying volumes will be present. Today's session will award professional continuing education credits as well as ISDs and AIA HSW CLUs. For AIA certificates, please email me at Billie, B-I-L-L-I-E, @apa.org, along with your AIA membership number if you have not done so in the past. Our webinar recordings will be posted to APA's website later this afternoon. Additionally, you will receive a follow-up email within 72 hours providing designated links to all webinar recordings, presentation slides, as well as information on upcoming webinars and town halls. At this time, it's my pleasure to introduce Lander Medlin, APA's Executive Vice President, your moderator for today. Lander, take it away.
Welcome all attendees. We appreciate your engagement in these town hall meetings as we further explore the impact of COVID-19 on our facilities organizations and the education enterprise. Our town halls occur every Friday at this time with a different target and focus. We are off next Friday to celebrate the July 4th holiday. A hint, on July 10, we will be exploring the topic challenges for auxiliary services, dorms, dining, and unions. As always, thank you for joining the dialogue. Please post your questions at any time. That's what makes this a rich conversation and the special community we share. As institutions determine their path to a fall reopening, the whole student experience will be a critical focus to show value. Place does matter. That's why we chose this topic today, the next in our series, The Road to Reopening Your Institution. Transportation and traversing to, from, and within the campus. These two panelists will share their perspective concerning the complexity that is COVID, planning for the ensuing chaos, and delivering a consistent student experience across different transportation modalities and circulation patterns, let alone the entirety of the campus itself. So the format is a bit different for today's town hall. I'll provide a brief introduction to set this week's context, introduce each panelist who will share their framing remarks. I'll ask them a few targeted primer questions, then proceed with Q&A from all of you. I'll conclude with a highlight on our professional development summer series, call for images, available resources, save the date, and closing remarks. With respect to the coronavirus statistics, the situation has turned grim again. COVID-19 cases have exploded in at least 30 states. New cases hit an all-time daily record of 40,000. We are going in the wrong direction. Only our collective behavior can change that fact. Public health officials are seeing a disturbing surge of infections given less than adequate social physical distancing, few wearing masks, and inadequate plans for testing and tracing those who get sick. The virus is not going to magically disappear. As Bill Gates said last night, we must restrain our behavior. Testing and contact tracing capabilities must be amped up. This all reinforces the importance of and criticality for social physical distancing and face coverings or masks. Again, it comes down to your behavior. As for the economy, stocks are down amidst the soaring new COVID cases. And we added another 1.5 million Americans who filed new claims for unemployment insurance, totaling 47 million people. Not good, not good at all. Nonetheless, higher education is proceeding with face-to-face reopening plans. There remains much preparation for the campus and its surrounding community. Hence, our panelists will share their reopening planning perspectives with all its complexity to deliver a consistent experience for students, faculty, and staff across the campus with a focus on various transportation modalities. The road to reopening takes leadership, collaboration, and aligned culture no matter the chosen path. Let's start with our first panelist. Joe Bellata, President and CEO of JBA Incorporated. Joe's firm provides planning and facilities management services to institutions of higher education with a focus on master planning, long-range planning, programming, space planning, facilities management, process development, and policies and procedures for colleges and universities for campus facilities problem-solving nationwide. Joe's background includes 15 years of experience as a facilities director and campus architect at 2 major universities. He has spent the past 5 years as the acting director of campus planning at the University of Iowa with broad reporting and support responsibilities, academic, administrative, and student affairs, and the University of Iowa hospitals. Joe earned his bachelor and master's degree in architecture from the University of Illinois and has completed extended studies in the Graduate School of Design at Harvard University and is a registered architect in the states of Colorado and Illinois. He recently earned the Distinguished Service Award from the Association of University Architects. Is actively involved in several higher education associations, and his resume includes over 300 master plans, long-range plans, program plans, and space plans for colleges and universities. We have been privileged to have Joe as a faculty member for APAU's Institute for Facilities Management program since 1999 and as an author for numerous sections of the APA body of knowledge. Joe, let's hear your focus and perspective on Iowa's approach and campus planning.
Thanks, Lander, especially for the kind introduction. Thanks everybody for having me. It's a difficult time, we all know. One of the things I'd like to do is kind of set up Adam for a little bit more detail relative to transportation issues on a campus. But I'd like to kind of start when an issue like this comes up, a pandemic comes up, a lot of us are very good at reacting and fixing the problem. We jump in as leaders, as workers on our campus to solve those problems. The perspective that we have to take as planners is to not only support that activity, but to start thinking about what is this going to do to our campuses, not only starting in August when our campuses open up, but what kind of cultural shifts are going to happen? What kinds of operational shifts need to happen? And how do we make sure that we're supportive of all campus programs that are going to change drastically in the future? So, I kind of use the perspective that I'm going to start out the discussion and we're going to be in a helicopter hovering above your campus, maybe a good half a mile, and taking a look at the impact and the future of what the COVID-19 is going to do to us. It's funny because I think a lot of you probably have experienced the scenario where when we decided it was very important to get the students back, the demands that we're hearing from the students about being on campus, being face-to-face, being in cohorts and with their peers is drastic. They want this to happen as much as our institutions want this to happen. And what we did is we jumped right into classrooms. I think a lot of us have studied how do we get students into classrooms? How do we get, what's the proper distancing? How do we handle, the safety aspects, the PPE and all those kinds of things? And think about this perspective. If you think about our classrooms, for most of us, it's 3 or 4% of our entire space. So what we did is we jumped into a very minor component of what we do have to solve. But think about the 97% of the rest of the space on your campus and the impact reopening your campus is going to have. And I'm going to get into a couple other perspectives regarding that. Why are the students wanting to come back? I don't think personally It's to sit in a lecture hall of 300 people and worrying about how safe they're going to be doing that. The students want that face-to-face experience. We believe, even though sometimes it's hard to measure, that the experience of a student at an institution, the physical place, is just as important in their learning experience as their academic curriculum. Many of us in today's town hall are facilities-oriented folks, and we've all argued that the place that the students come is whatever percent you want to make up. 75% of the reason why a student chooses an institution is the physical environment. I think COVID has shown how important that is, more so than ever in the past. And so the perspective we have to take is, how does that entire environment work? Is it just the classroom? I would argue it's not. Even though it's very important that we have to solve, we have to start thinking about the rest of the space. The University of Iowa it's a public institution. I do a lot of work for the institution, and I'm grateful for that opportunity. It's about 32,000 students. We house about 20% of those students on campus, which means 80% of those students are not in a situation where they can leave vehicles at home. They need modes of transportation to move. And at the University of Iowa, it's complicated because even those 6,300 beds, or those students living on campus, aren't necessarily close enough to their classes or to the places of destination that they can simply walk. This, compounded by ADA and access, mobility impaired issues, have gotten us to a point where we're reliant on how people move through the campus. University of Iowa has also got 25,000 employees. We have a hospital, and a majority of those employees are supporting some of our leaders in terms of aggressively battling COVID, parallel to the academic and educational and research requirements that the hospital has undertaken. So, as most of you know, the state of Iowa is not very urban, but Iowa City, where the university is one of the most densely populated areas in the entire state. And it does challenge other large cities in terms of the amount of people. So what we've got isn't the situation of housing students in classrooms and how do you do that safely, is how do you handle the chaos of moving people throughout the campus, throughout the community. In Iowa, it's somewhat complicated because there's 4 municipalities, there's 4 towns that the university sits within. So you've got 4 sets of ideas on how to be safe relative to COVID. And all of those have to be coordinated because it's not the student's job to figure out, well, I'm on this part of campus, so I should operate this way, or I should use certain methods to be safe. Now I'm in Iowa City, so I should be doing something different. And so the challenges of our 4 communities and the institution coming together is pretty drastic. As the university started dealing with the return to campus, the good thing about, we had a flood in 2008, and the flood was a catastrophic event. $1 billion worth of assets were basically taken offline, had to be rebuilt. Some of them were never rebuilt. But during that event, what ended up happening is the results of that changed the way the university operated. And there's a group that the university created called the CIMT, the Critical Incident Management Team is what those letters stand for. And because that team existed and worked together in a proactive way since 2008, the University of Iowa was able to kind of address a lot of the COVID almost immediately. Didn't hurt that we had a hospital as part of the institution. So that partnership was critical. I think we're all, I think, Adam will probably agree that we've reached out, all of us have reached out to our peers to figure out what are the best ways to kind of address COVID. there are very similar approaches we're all taking, but I did want to share with you some of the unique things that the University of Iowa has to consider that hopefully your institutions are thinking about. One of those is that one of the things the university decided was that 50%, I'm sorry, I apologize. Any course that they have that's over 50 people will be continually held online. Any course below 50 is where the university is going to focus its efforts on the face-to-face interaction and that experiential learning that students are thriving for, as well as our faculty. When in March and April, when we all left campus and everything was online, that was a scenario that cannot be replicated when students come back. So if you think about, especially an undergraduate's education, 75 to 80% of their coursework is still currently in a didactic setting or a lecture setting. When you take that and put it online, that amount of contact time that is now basically mobile or remote, students are not going to go back to their residence hall, lay in their bed and take that class. They're going to start to do it wherever they can find space. So here's a space need that just hit us at the University of Iowa that we didn't have space for. We have 32,000 students that 80% of their work is going to be done online, or I should say their contact time, not all their work, but a huge percentage is going to require students being everywhere and anywhere, adding to the chaos of that mobile movement throughout the campus. I think we can all agree that when we come up with guidelines to support COVID, and you set those guidelines for your buildings, like we're all doing, certain amounts of distances in classrooms, certain ways you come back to work. If you're in a controlled environment, it's pretty easy to do pretty well at that control. But as soon as that starts to move and people are allowed to basically transport themselves through any parts of campus, whether it's bikes or pedestrian movement, the chaos begins. So how do you control that chaos? The University of Iowa is kind of looking at things from 3 or 4 perspectives when it comes to movement, and we're really relying on some self-policing and some of our basic guidance relative to PPE and wearing masks. In all cases, they're going to be required. All buildings or anything enclosed. A bus is an enclosed facility. Students are required to wear masks in anything that has a door. So in doing that, we're hoping that we don't have to do many changes to the exterior pedestrian movement system, that we're going to kind of leave that alone. We're not going to start painting special places to walk outside. We have to lean on our students who are adults to help support some of the social distancing requirements. And when it comes to bikes, many of you out there have very strong bike systems. One of the things the University of Iowa decided to do about 20 years ago was not separate bike and pedestrian movement. Basically, larger super sidewalks are being used for our bike system. We're changing that philosophy as we speak. We're having to separate bike movement and pedestrian movement. And this started prior to COVID just because of the conflicts that happened between those two areas. We are unfortunately probably a year behind from having a good system or having the infrastructure to do that. So one of our concerns, and we really don't have a plan quite yet, is to figure out what kind of an impact the bike system is going to have, because we are asking students, if you have a bike, get it to campus. It will reduce the dependency on our bus systems. Because of the urbanization of the University of Iowa, we have a robust, it's called CAMBUS, robust bus system. And as Adam will attest to, we have actually 4 communities that we sit within, but 2 other bus systems that our system has to integrate with. So we are about 48 hours away from announcing basically a movement plan in the use of CAN bus. We have found that even our classroom scheduling is being impacted by the ability to move students throughout the campus based on our mass transit and our bus system. We are recommending some basic bus protocol, where to enter the bus, requiring masks, the potential of using UV light at our entries to the bus systems. We are not, though, changing routes. We are not changing that we know of today, and I have to apologize because we literally are 48 hours from a draft plan, but we've realized that the impact of major changes to the bus system ripples into classroom scheduling, to access to research, the social distancing that has to require along the way. And right now we're trying to be as consistent as we can with what the students are used to and their access points from getting from point A to point B, depending on where they're at. I think the other couple things I'd like to leave with is that there's a couple things that I think as a planner, besides helping the institution open the campus, half of our jobs is to think about what impacts this has from this point forward, whether it's as we're coming off of COVID someday, which we will, or whether it's changing the culture and how we operate our spaces, who comes to campus and how often. This is having a major cultural effect on the institution. My staff alone has realized that since they've started working at home, they have put in twice as many hours as they've ever put in before. There's no downtime between meetings. There's no downtime or decompressing time going to campus and coming back from campus. And so it's changing, it's going to change how we all operate in the near future as well as potentially in the future. I believe we're going to be moving from a service model of taking care of our programs to more of a strategic model. Never have we ever had as much important role as facilities managers, facilities services to support the campus's success than right now. How we clean facilities, what facilities we use when, the space utilization, what happens when things fail, what happens in terms of the movement within a building. Facilities management is helping with actual circulation patterns within buildings, identifying which doors should be used as entries, which doors should be used as exits, unless there's a fire event or an egress event. Facilities management is being leaned on for just about every single operational aspect of the institution right now. This is an opportunity as we move in the future to become more of a partner and be more strategic relative to how the campuses operate and the success of our campuses. And I think the last thing I'd probably leave with is that for a long time, well, 300 plus years, our jobs and our students have always treated education as a destination. We go to work, we go to school, and that's changed overnight. No longer is the destination the basic reason, but what's happening is the importance of that destination once you're there is going to change. It may be less important that that destination is for my office to do planning on the campus. More importantly, that office may be used differently so students can take courses online while they're at campus. So there's going to be a big shift in that. So I think I'll probably leave it at that. I've got more detail that can be shared throughout the afternoon. But I think the transportation issue of movement throughout the campus is our biggest battle at the University of Iowa. I think space plans for buildings are a piece of cake. I think agreeing to the guidelines and the metrics that we use for that is just a lot of effort. Controlling our movement and setting up a framework for our students to be safe as they move throughout the campus is the biggest battle that we have. We're working on those answers this week, and we have been for 2 months. It's just going to take a little more time to figure out the best way to support our students' movement.
Joe, that was fantastic. You really set the stage for Adam and where he's headed. Frankly, when you talked about the chaos of moving people in and around the campus and the critical nature of it, and then tying it to something that we have not heard on these calls, and that is around how folks will consume online content and where they'll consume it, and the ways in which you talked about the ensuing chaos. Really, really a great point, and one we've got to advance. Your other comment about movement to from a service model to a strategic model gives us a great opportunity for facilities to have a bigger, larger, more influential voice, and we'll need to lean into that. And then your education treated as a destination. Wow, has that changed, right? Yeah. Just the workplace treated as a destination, all has changed. And I think you were right when you closed it with controlling the movement means you got to control the chaos, right? So it's going to be really fascinating to see how this all happens. So thank you so much. Fantastic. Sure. So I'm going to move to Adam now. Adam Lawver, Director of Campus Services, Michigan State University. Adam provides leadership and strategic vision to 775 plus support and professional staff, including temporary, on-call, and student employees. He's responsible for shaping the culture to reinforce collaboration, accountability, and create a work environment that recognizes and supports equity, diversity, and inclusion. Adam oversees the business areas of custodial services, landscape services, surplus store and recycling center, and transportation services. He has served as a National Malcolm Baldrige Examiner, holds APA's CEFP, Certified Educational Facilities Professional credential, a NALP Landscape Industry Certified Manager, and State of Michigan Licensed Landscape Architect. He has served in multiple roles, beginning as a student employee, and obtained 3 degrees, all from Michigan State University. Adam, let's get some highlights from a recent Big Ten transportation survey and your insight on delivering a consistent experience using your transportation systems.
Great, thanks, Lander. Good afternoon or good morning, everyone, depending on where you're from. Joe, awesome job kind of setting the stage and really framing this discussion. Just this past week, I had the opportunity to facilitate a discussion with Big Ten facility officers, focusing specifically on public transportation. And we shared a survey during that and got some feedback that I thought I'd share with this group today. So we'll kind of look at kind of Big Ten regional universities first, get some context there, and then I'll talk a little bit about what we know so far in the state of Michigan, some of our busing systems. Then I'll talk a little bit more specifically at Michigan State. So we're going to kind of go big picture, and then we'll talk a little bit more details. Many of you, I'm sure, are working through all sorts of return to work and return to a safe campus committees and things like that. So the context that I provide to you today may be just specific to our situation in Michigan State. You know, when you think about the type of emergency that we are in right now, it's one that I don't think we've ever faced before or thought about. Typically, a snow removal emergency happens over a 2 to 3 day time period, and then you're relatively back to normal. This, at this point, does not have an end in date. So the challenge with keeping the mental fatigue and capacity to continually collaborate with folks that you may not have collaborated with in the past is not only an opportunity, but one that I just encourage all of you to continually stay present with and continually reach out and build those kind of relationships, because with the types of software and MS Teams and all the other tools that we have at our fingertips now, there's really no excuse to improve the collaboration and coordination amongst not only entities within your campuses, but especially with those key partners outside. So let's kind of cover a little bit of the Big Ten Transportation Survey, and then we'll talk a little bit about how we're approaching those partnerships at Michigan State. We had a mix of ownership of the city bus systems across the Big Ten. Some are obviously owned by the city, some are private, as well as some are owned and operated by the university themselves. And so with each one of those ownerships, you're either looking at a strategic partnership with one that's not owned specifically by your facilities operation or your university, or if it's owned within the university, then it's really also a strategic partnership with those entities that you collaborate with to move masses of people from point A to point B. All the universities indicated that they would be providing these services in the fall, so there's really none that are expecting to not provide busing services, for example, but all indicated an average that they were predicting around 66% ridership, and that had a range between a minimum of 35% and a maximum of 98%. All indicated a combination of various strategies that Joe talked a little bit about, and I wanted to bring to your attention, if you haven't already, many already have, but there are really excellent CDC guidelines around the different modalities of transportation. So looking at mass transportation from trains to buses to airplanes, as well as Uber services and on-demand services and things like that. So be sure to check out those, especially for those that are trying to put together communication and messaging and signage. The CDC has excellent resources for all of us. Some of those strategies were very similar, looking at 6-foot physical distancing on buses. Some were requiring masks and allowing passengers to sit within 6 feet, but no standing room, only in the aisle. So it's really a mix. Just probably depends on your own context and how your systems are approaching this. Definitely plexiglass shields between the driver and passengers. That was pretty much uniform across the groups. Use of rear door only, changing or modifying the fare boxes. I'll talk a little bit later about contact tracing and some of the challenges we're talking at Michigan State about the fare boxes and the technologies that are on 3 different providers of buses, and some that require the passengers to swipe an ID and some that don't. And how are we going to try to create social norms around just that habit alone? Looking at frequent wipe down of touch points, as well as misting or fogging the buses at night. So once the bus is pulled out of service, placing a canister that can then sanitize the bus overnight. Some looking at the UV lighting system, similar to what have been installed on the subways in New York, etc. Protocol with sanitation. Most indicated that they would have access to additional buses, knowing that the reduced capacity per bus is expected. So the need to increase buses pertaining to the specific route is absolutely something that many are considering right now. The other idea was around limiting the routes to a 15-minute cycle, so that one of the CDC guidelines is looking at if we can limit our contact within the 6 feet to less than 15 minutes, perhaps our chances are better of not contracting the virus. So looking at route density would then be an input or one of the inputs for that would look at class scheduling. So as many of your universities, I'm sure, are changing like we are, looking at longer class times throughout the day to try to space out the students that are going to be in-person classes, as well as looking at a 6-day-a-week operation. So if you manage and control the busing operation within your own institution, then looking at how do you staff those routes, how do you look at maybe additional shifts with personnel, and then for those that are operating within the city, the universities need to be a good partner and communicator with those city bus systems and operators, so that they're aware of the changes that are happening at your institution and can coordinate and collaborate appropriately. The other area that we talked about was the potential for how would you fund those additional buses, and there's quite a mix between university budget, the transportation department budget specifically, and one indicated the potential for CARES Act reimbursement. So I wanted to bring that to attention to this group. If anything, reach out to your budget officers this next week and see if there's potential for reimbursements with your transportation related expenses as a result of COVID mitigations. From there, that was really the summary of kind of the Big Ten group. So as we look in the state of Michigan, I have an opportunity to co-chair one of the return to campus committees at Michigan State. We have broken into 22 subcommittees across the university, focusing on everything from how do we prepare classrooms and spaces, to transportation, to travel requirements, etc. So I have a privilege of helping lead the conversation around transportation. This was one of the first times that we've been able to bring our 3 busing entities together. We have a bus system that operates across the state called the Michigan Flyer that connects cities to cities and cities to the airports. And then locally, we have a city bus operated system that works within our city of East Lansing and local region. And then we have private bus operators that connect students from the apartment complexes to the main campus. So we were able to facilitate a call this last week that brought all 3 of those entities together and just gave them an opportunity to share how they're reacting to COVID, what protocols they've put in place, what type of sanitizers are they using, and really kind of sharing a little bit of best practices, but using the institution, the university, as the context for bringing those entities together. So great opportunities to do that, especially during a crisis like this. And we're going to continue to work through that collaboration. One of the approaches we're looking at Michigan State, similar to Iowa, is the requirement of face coverings within facilities and the potential to require them outside of facilities. So in other words, when you step onto campus or drive onto campus or ride your bike onto campus, you will be required to wear a mask. So if your experience of getting to campuses on a bus, then we wanted to make sure our busing partners would also require their passengers to wear a mask as well. So this was where we kind of talk about high level of social norming and how can we just get people into a new behavior, if you will, so that when they leave their apartment or leave their dorm, etc., that they will just get in the habit of putting the mask on and coming into campus to learn and expand their lives. We also learned from this discussion that our current airport at Detroit Metro is experiencing around a 22% capacity on their flights. So as we look at the student populations that we have here at Michigan State, how many are domestic versus international versus in-state and out-of-state, and how many of those students will be coming through the airports, then that was important input information for the state of Michigan busing system and trying to predict capacity of routes, et cetera, to get the students about 70 miles from our airport to campus. So just bringing those entities together to have those kind of conversations and look at consistency of signage, consistency of mandates, and looking at route capacity related to the student class schedule are some of the ways that we're approaching the bus as a transportation modality right now. So with that, I just thought I'd provide you a little bit more detail into that particular modality. I think I'm going to pass back to Lander because I believe we're going to cover other modalities here in a little bit.
That is great, Adam. We are already getting a request for that summary of the Big Ten. So I think I can talk to you after that along with Gordy, and I can't imagine that they wouldn't be willing to let us post that because it's really great information. So we will do that. You're opening to encourage mental health and well-being and being much more attentive to that and really using these tools to truly collaborate, I thought was fantastic as well. And it's amazing what you have been doing at Michigan State to really create that consistent experience with those busing modalities. So it's pretty impressive. I wanted to ask the 2 of you, as we probe a little deeper into this, how are you handling the different transportation modalities now from buses, but to, you talked a little bit about bicycles, but I know Michigan State has scooters, and then maybe a little more around the pedestrian traffic and their relationship to the circulation patterns. That may answer some of the questions that we're already getting, but it would be good for both of you to tap into that. Joe, do you want to go first, and then I'll have Adam?
Yeah, thanks, Lander. One of the things that's affecting the movement of the campus at Iowa is that, and it's a good thing. Like many of us, we have our student life programs and our auxiliaries that are, in some ways a little bit autonomous to the academic and research programs. And we have athletics and we have recreation services. And, for us, we have a hospital. So we have all these different businesses on the campus. Again, because of being forced to do this at the 2008 flood, it was almost an immediate partnership amongst all those businesses as soon as we knew we had to deal with COVID. And so what that did is it took all the traditional space management practices and threw them out the door and said, okay, how can we make best use of our facilities regardless of who pays for them or who's assigned those? And so what ends up happening is everybody's coming together to identify ways that we can use spaces differently throughout the day, ways that student life kind of functions, those social functions can happen in academic areas or vice versa. Where can classrooms be taught? Can classrooms be taught in the president's residence? Can classrooms be taught in the rec center because we have a big open room that we used to do yoga in? And what that's done is great for our buildings, but provided an amazing challenge to pedestrian movement because now there's less known it was easy to know where students were going to be based on the course schedule. They were going to be, in certain rooms at certain times during the day. Now, back to the chaos, we figured that we had to come up with, like many, per some of the CDC recommendations, is we're coming up with a pedestrian circulation plan for every single building on the campus. It's a challenge time-wise, but having to mix building entries, kind of coordinate and manage where those are relative to ADA routes, to elevators, vertical circulation patterns, widths of hallways that sometimes aren't wide enough, loading and unloading of classrooms, and the control of those mobs of people that when they do come together, how do we control that? So one of our focus efforts is in the pedestrian system. And that's one of the areas that our office is responsible for, and we're working in 2 layers on that. Layer 1 is we're joined at the hip with the registrar's office and the course scheduling, which is changing drastically. We're seeing programs that typically were very traditional in nature actually create cohorts so that some of the traditional liberal arts programs or non-medical programs are creating neighborhoods of students so that they're together more and they're controlled and their contacts are controlled. Well, that changes the course scheduling and how courses are loaded. And so we're developing internal pedestrian plans, for lack of a better term. And I think, well, that's kind of where our focus is. I think I mentioned earlier that honestly, our bikeway system is it's kind of a mess. I'll be honest with you. We don't have enough dedicated paths, and everything is dual use. And I think people are going to see why our master plan is always intended to kind of separate some of that for safety purposes. And then maybe let Adam talk about maybe the buses and the scooters, but I think that's our focus, is primarily when people are very close to one another and they're inside buildings.
Got it. And Adam, maybe you could highlight before we go to that, because we have someone who's really wants to know about this. You mentioned a sanitizer fogger canister. Can you expand on that canister and what you're doing there? Because they may have to get off, and I think that they're really worried about not getting an answer to that.
Yeah. So I will be sure to follow up at the end of the webinar. I do not have the product information, but basically it is an aerosol can that the maintenance techs place on the bus when it's out of service, and after they've completed their wipe downs within the bus, The canister is placed pretty much in the center of the bus, and it takes about 5 hours for it to expel throughout the bus. They have the doors closed, and then they mark on the window the time of when the canister was let off and when they expect it to be done, so that whomever the next person is, the next driver for that bus to pick it up, then they can take that. So that's one approach. Another approach would be deploying the misters, dispensers, that type of thing, or a fogger that might only take a custodian or maintenance tech position 15 minutes or less, 10 minutes to walk through the bus and perhaps accomplish a similar sanitation. So just know that those are options for you, and that can be sure to include. I'll reach out to our city bus partner and find out what product they're using for that.
Excellent, Adam. Can you tell me, does that include a UV inspection? Are you dealing with that, you or Joe?
We are not at this point. It was discussed in the Big Ten call. Some universities are looking at that, but I don't have the specific universities that are looking at the UV.
I will find that for the caller, and we'll make sure we get that in and answered, and they can send me an email because I've got that info, and I'll make that happen for that person. So that's great to know, Adam. I'm going to track you back to these other modalities because it's going to definitely answer some questions for people, I think, in terms of what you're doing either with scooters or your shared bike program, which I think is going to answer somebody's question around this rent-a-bike and how you're keeping them clean and safe. And then also you have some interesting stuff you're doing with university vehicles. And then we'll see if we circle back to Joe on any of those. Joe, if you see you have some stuff to add to that too. Okay, Adam.
Sounds great. Sounds great. So most of your campuses will have a primary bus shelter location where perhaps more than 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 buses will congregate in between their scheduled routes. At that location, we have 2 big ones on campus, and there's a public restroom within them, as well as vending machines and things like that as the students that congregate in those areas waiting for their bus. We, again, through partnership, brought our custodial services team in a conversation with the bus operator to see how we might be able to help each other during those times. So we are adding an additional custodian in a day porter position that will increase the number of touch points at those stations on campus as well before they move on to their next stop in their route. Will help the drivers with additional wipe downs of the buses themselves. So think of that as another opportunity for your university to collaborate with your bus operator. As far as the other modalities, university vehicles and travel, so at Michigan State and maybe at your institution as well, we are limiting 1 person per vehicle right now, and that has been a huge challenge, especially for our facilities workforce. So many of you are probably right in the middle of that as well. We implemented that back in late March, early April. For our 8 and 10 passenger buses, we have installed plexiglass between the driver and the rear seats, and then we are only allowing 1 person in the back of those rear seats. So we obviously did not have enough vehicles for all of our workforce. Let's just talk specifically within our facilities workforce. So one of the approaches that we've taken is the deployment of additional bicycles. It's the summer, it's a beautiful time in the state of Michigan. It won't be so nice in November, and we'll have to work through a different plan at that time. But we redeployed the vehicles that were issued to supervisors to move around and meet with their crews. We redeployed those vehicles to our frontline staff so that they could, do the work. And then many of our supervisors are riding bicycles around campus. And the really awesome thing that has come from that is our workforce is saying, wow, we haven't seen our supervisor as much as we have. So that's a great thing. Many of our supervisors are stopping, having conversations. They're seeing things, especially on our landscape crews. They're seeing parts of campus that just didn't have time to do before. And during this current crisis, there is not as much paperwork and those types of tasks for a supervisor to do back in the office. There's much more time for those leaders to be out in the field working with staff and truly working on the relationship and facilitating that culture and soliciting those types of things. So it's a really neat thing that's happening here, and I'm sure it's happening at your institutions as well. We also are looking at increasing the number of mopeds and scooters on campus this coming fall, with the prediction that we'll have fewer students riding the buses. So looking at our contracts with our scooter operator, we're currently in conversations around trying to find the right mix of the quantity of scooters that will be deployed. Now, for those scooters that are electric and they get collected at night by the company or whoever they contract with to do that, get recharged and wiped down and then redeployed in the morning at the set locations that we have on campus. So we will obviously be providing communication to our student population to educate them on safe hygiene practices for themselves, to own that for themselves, but then also for us as an institution to work with these operators to make sure that they have those protocols in place. So trying to kind of double dip on each side of the sanitation component. Looking at shared bicycles, so I'm sure your institutions maybe not have their own bike shop on campus and a service center. We do. We're about 10 years in with that now. At Michigan State, the campus footprint is about a mile by a mile for the main campus. So for students to make their way across campus, it takes a little bit. So many either purchase bikes, rent bikes from us, or bring a bike along with them. For some reason, when they graduate or leave, the bike stays on our bike racks locked up. And so our police will impound the bikes, and then they'll impound them until the end of the registration. And if the student doesn't claim the bikes, then the asset is turned over to our bike shop, and we repair them with students, and then we reissue them out either through rentals or sales, etc., for the public and back to students. So we typically rent out approximately 300 bikes a semester, and we're looking at increasing that capacity, thinking that we'll have many more students that will choose to ride a bike to get across campus as needed. So being a little bit more strategic on better understanding the shifts that will happen across the different modalities on campus, and just having backup plans for each one of those modalities, I think is important for the audience today. Then lastly, on-demand services, so the Ubers and Lyfts. Just so you know, each one of those companies have posted their COVID-19 safety precautions. Michigan State specifically was in the process of developing the application and launching our own internal on-demand service for faculty staff, trying to reduce the amount of times that faculty staff members have to walk out to their personal vehicles to drive across campus or walk across campus to get to a meeting. We were hoping to launch that on-demand service to allow them to basically give them door-to-door service and ultimately improve and reduce the waste and process that occurs from travel time on our campus. Due to the restrictions with COVID and everything else, we put that specific modality on hold for a year, and but hope to relook at that this next summer and eventually launch that service. So that's how we're approaching the different modalities, Lander.
That's really excellent. Joe, do you want to track back to that? Because I think you may have some comments. Yeah.
Actually, and this may be a little bit, I'm going to kind of backstep into more of a strategic thing that the University of Iowa is taking very seriously and being aggressive about. And it's not specific to each modality, but the demand for parking and access to our hospital and to any facility is it's so sensitive right now. When COVID hit, the first thing we did when people went and worked remotely is we reorganized our parking so that all our nurses and doctors and our patrons can get adjacent to the hospital immediately. And so the whole parking management program basically shifted to support that enterprise to keep people safe. As we open up campus in August, there's a very strong push that if you do not have to be on that campus, more than a day or two during the week, you are being recommended or you're encouraged to work remotely for at least the next semester, if not the year. And our Human Resources Department has made that kind of a very possible and easy transition. What that's going to do is allow, we're studying how many parking stalls and locations can be then reorganized so that commuter students can get closer to their facilities, use their car to hang out in between classes, and really kind of improve that circulation pattern on the campus. So it's only being enabled by people working remotely who have really nothing to do with the parking system, but it ends up enabling us to kind of repurpose the strategic parking areas that are large and close into campus.
That's excellent. And maybe, Joe, you and Adam can speak to, there are two aspects to this thing around the bus, the number of riders that goes to your car situation as well. So it's sort of, I'm going to try to track through all that. Are you limiting the number of riders based on now the new number of seats because you aren't going to allow them to stand so that you can manage capacity? Do you see where I'm going here? Adam, you want to tackle that first, and then I'll go to Joe, and then I'm going to link that to a couple of other questions people had.
Yeah, we have a mix across the 3 different providers, actually. So one provider was limiting to 50% or less capacity. So if they have a 48 passenger bus, their max capacity of as they're booking rides, that was more on the charter service was going to be 24. For our local city operator, the plan is to not limit the number or skip seats and put plexiglass or things like that. It was instead to ensure that their capacity would hit once they began to see ridership that had standing room in the aisle. So their goal was to, at that time, the operator would call back to dispatch, and then an additional bus would be added to that route if needed. So that is going to be super fluid at the end of August, going into the beginning of September 2nd. So our committee plans to stay together and continually work through those routes, and thankfully our operators is going to be as flexible as possible navigating through the first couple of weeks of the semester.
Okay, that's good. Joe, because this is an interesting one. Are you doing that? Because, you know, with your situation that you described, you do have, I mean, I know you're trying to deal with bicycle, you know, bring your bicycle. That's a good approach, et cetera. But how are you focused on that, handling that?
You know, I wish I can provide more detail, but not, things are kind of in flux right now. Our parking system is kind of doing that. Right now, the only thing that has been employed to date really is kind of the self-policing of the 6-foot social distancing, and some of the things that Adam talked about cleaning and approach and is pretty consistent with what the University of Iowa is doing. What we haven't done is set any specific capacities at this point in time, but I can't say there won't be that. No, next week is when we're trying to hear. The reason why they haven't gone ahead and implemented anything right now is because we actually shut down the system for a while, and since there's nobody on campus, it's not a problem. And they're trying to study what is a balance between the old capacities, if you will, versus the new capacities. So I just wish I could comment on it. It's really difficult to right now.
No, I think that's absolutely fine. And I know that the Big Ten has, from that summary analysis, they've got some individual institutions that are doing a variety of things that I think, Adam, you and I could probably get, right? And we can get it to folks.
You bet.
And so that will help too. And I think it is, see, what you're describing, Joe, is the fluidity of this situation, because it does relate to the schedule for classes. It relates to the number of people that will be on campus, fall enrollment. I mean, there are a whole host of factors, which is why you said it's ensuing chaos. So it's a really important point. So now one of our colleagues said that driving between classes is a big problem. And I see that the both of you are trying to push to a bike infrastructure and even shuttle routes. But do you think, Joe, maybe you could comment on this related to the demand for parking? You've moved parking now in terms of getting people that are part of the hospital, but as you're approaching it, do you see differences with numbers of cars trucking between classes for parking?
Actually, yeah, not at the University of Iowa. because of the parking demand, the costs of parking, and where and how much parking is available to students, we do not see a lot of students driving between classes. It's mostly commuter. When they get here, they park, they don't move it because they're lucky to find a spot. And we just don't see it at the University of Iowa. In my efforts, planning other places in the country, it is a big issue. It's amazing how students they'll drive 3 blocks if they can, but it's all about parking availability.
Yes, yes.
We just
and most of our institutions do see them as hunting licenses, and they're left to their own devices. Adam, did you want to comment?
So our committee will be actually diving into the parking operations this next week, and if you think about the touch points related to the infrastructure that's in place for the parking system, you have gate booths, you have pay-by-plate systems, and things like that. So developing routines to sanitize those assets, or do we modify and how we collect revenues for parking operations, because it's an auxiliary business for Michigan State, maybe as well as for your institution. How do we keep that operation still solvent, if you will, with revenues and expenses? The other thing that I think to frame this particular question is, as well, is as we change around, so Joe alluded to any classes over 50 will be online, and any under 50 would perhaps be a mix of in-person. That may change the patterns of how students, what they choose to do and where they choose to live. And so depending on a student and their schedule, they may actually become a commuter student versus one that lived on campus, unless your institution requires all freshmen to live on campus. So I think for us to just make sure that we have enough voices in our planning conversations to make sure that we try to reduce as many blind spots as we possibly can in our planning. I think that's the lesson learned. One of the things that we've done is we've included our vice president from our student union on campus to try to get the voice of the student in our planning, as well as they help operate a safe ride shuttle for students from the period of 11 p.m. until 3 a.m. to kind of get through the bar time there. So how they approach their safety protocols really needs to be in line with what our bus operators are and how we approach university vehicles. So I think this is just such a great time for all of us to try to connect the various constituents across both inside the campus and outside.
Got it. So someone asked if there was any social distancing for vehicles to park. I get the impression that there is not. Joe, when you've been looking at this, you're not going to limit parking spaces, are you, for vehicles?
No, we're not. In fact, just the basic sheer size of a vehicle in a parking stall, most of our parking stalls are between 8.5 and 9 feet wide and 18 to 20 feet long, and the distance between doors and things, for the most part, provide that social distancing, so it promotes it almost automatically. Now, that said, there is nothing that COVID allows us to do to be more efficient and sustainable and save energy and build collaborative efforts and be efficient with space. I mean, we're having to go in the opposite direction of where we've been trying to go for decades. So, when we used to promote or be against the single occupied vehicle, right, and promote collaboration amongst ridership and things, now that's a problem. So, we're kind of struggling with it. But when it comes to guidelines for the parking, we haven't addressed that at all.
Okay. I didn't think of Michigan State.
Yeah, the only caveat for us would be our curbside collection. So at our surplus operation, some institutions may not have a business like this, but if you think about all the university assets, they all leave the campus at one point or another through sale. And so we have a surplus and recycling business on campus. that takes all campus assets from IT equipment to furniture to vehicles, you name it. That's the only way for assets to leave the institution. We have an in-person store that we have not reopened yet, but we have seen an increase in online sales. So we've really re-geared this business, and really it's innovation right now for us. We're changing how we do what we do. So our online sales have increased quite a bit. And so then we have, like many other grocery stores, et cetera, or curbside pickup for food service, et cetera, we've implemented similar protocol where it's every other space, and they have to phone in and things like that. So we're really adopting what has already been, implemented in the private industry.
Very good, and it goes right back to someone made a comment on the question chat that said they were going to put allow food trucks in the parking areas appropriately distanced in order to allow for food for commuters to go back to use those parking spaces for Wi-Fi. And maybe, your circle of chaos when it comes to where they're going to do their online course reviews and such. So I thought that was fascinating, and I thought maybe the rest of the group may not have seen or that on the chat. So I thought that was a good one. I don't want to leave this yet because we're getting some interesting questions around the occupancy of shuttles, and so this was interesting. Shuttles or buses, and even your other vehicles, because Adam, you've talked about that, and that is so that social distancing can be achieved, or will the requirement for masks negate that? What is the thinking between the two of you? Adam, you want to tackle that one first?
Yeah, I'll go first. So how effective a mask is with this particular virus is super questionable, right? What, in addition to requiring a mask and basically increasing capacity, you also have, from a mechanical standpoint on the bus, you have the ability to either exchange the air or bring in fresh air. So making sure that the operators are out, if they run the heat during the winter or they run the air conditioning, that they're always bringing in fresh air from the outside. And then how can we also roll down the windows so that we have higher air exchanges in not only spaces within a facility, but also in an enclosed space like a bus or a shuttle. So just being mindful of those things and having more conversations with your bus operators around those particular air exchanges.
Perfect. And I will add before I ask you, Joe, and that is when I listened to the Big Ten, some of them said that depending on their route time, that contact duration is an important part of this. And so they were talking about maybe not having standing room at all, but because of contact duration could be a factor in how they either densify or de-densify this space. So I thought it was a fascinating one. Joe, did you want to take a run at that?
Well, I think the only thing I can add to Adam is one of the things that we're doing is encouraging students and trying to adjust some schedules so that they aren't rushing throughout the day, and we're trying to get them to show up sooner at route stops and stations so that they can be conscious about their distancing. So it's kind of pre-boarding the bus, and we're trying to kind of spread things out in those areas.
Good.
I think that'd be the only thing I could probably add.
Okay, good. So, this is the long-standing, we're getting this a lot, but it's about face masks, and it's about requiring them or not with the increase of COVID. Now, I think that both of you spoke about face masks, and maybe you could help us. You've talked about them overall, but they're talking not only about should you require them, and then, of course, the age-old handling of students and staff refusal to comply with mandatory masks if you have indeed done that, and what that's going to mean in practice. Boy, that's a tough one. Joe, do you want to travel into that?
Thanks for starting, Joe.
Well, this is where I get into trouble, I think. But I like many of you, we have recently experienced some pretty extensive protests and demonstrations at the University of Iowa, pretty liberal area for Iowa. And some of this is kind of related to how the institution has taken a look at enforcement, whether it's, no matter what the enforcement is. So because of that, there's a big, strong push to, it is required, but I'm not sure it'll be enforced. There's still study about that right now. I don't think there's been any decisions made, but I do have to say, I've worked a lot of places in the country, and the University of Iowa, there is a culture there that for such a big school does have this kind of family-oriented feel to it. It does not feel like 32,000. It feels like 10, 12,000 students. And that culture alone, they're banking on that people do the right thing. And I think it's probably a pretty good gamble. You're going to have a handful of people that just refuse to do it. And I think the peer pressure is going to be pretty tough on them. But I'm not sure campus security has come up with any specific enforcement rules.
Well, maybe that peer pressure is going to do it. You know, it will be interesting, right? Let's hope we don't have any fights, but that's interesting.
You know, sometimes it feels unresponsible, but if you think about everything we talk about, you can't control everything.
You cannot.
So you can set up the guideline and set up, here's the best way to do things, and then we all have to help self-police and self-enforce. And just like you said at the beginning of the town hall, Lander, we can't change this COVID thing until we all get on board and do the right things.
Yep. Good point. Yep. Adam, you want to add to that, or you want to throw it back at me?
No, I think we're all struggling with behaviors and norms, right? And how we model that as leaders, as university employees that are required to wear masks. How are we modeling that behavior for the community, for our student population that doesn't do that? I liken it similar to the social change, if you will, around the campus going tobacco-free a few years back. And for our international student population and other populations, that it was a cultural norm to smoke. And so coming on to a mile by a mile campus where it's all of a sudden not allowed, we handled those conversations face to face with students, with faculty staff that were also continuing to smoke. We provided, smoking cessation programs and those types of things. But it was a challenge. And we're 3 or so years in. We put signs on sidewalks, etc. We're 3 or 4 years in now, and I would say that it's a minor issue today. With the face mask piece, it's also a piece of mutual respect for your fellow population, right? And what you're trying to do is control your own water droplets, and we will require that definitely indoors, most likely outdoors as well. So the conversations we've had so far with our facility staff, it's been interesting because they've been working in buildings, etc. Some have not had their mask on, and then our customers are emailing our vice president or me, etc., that, hey, one of your facility staff was not wearing their mask. And so it's allowed us to frame that conversation for our facilities professionals that, hey, we're not really, delivering great customer experience if we're not also modeling the safe practices that we're all being asked to model. So that's one way to frame it for your staff, perhaps internally within your facilities operation. Socially within our student population, we're one of the many across the country now that have had college-aged students that have attended bars recently. We had over 43 that have been contact traced back to one of our bars in East Lansing that has recently shut down again, because we've had 43 students or attendants that have now tested positive for COVID. So how we as an institution use those events, but to try to help our population stay diligent with doing that and stay diligent with maintaining the 6-foot social distancing, not congregating in groups, etc. It's hard, and I get it. If I was 19 years old, I would probably do things differently. But what we have to do as leaders is continually try to educate, model the behavior ourselves, because we've got a lot of eyes on us. And I think that can only help, right? We can only control what we can control. And I think the wearing of the mask is one of those pieces, but it's going to require all of us.
That's really
Andrew,
great.
can I add to that?
Yeah, go ahead, Joe.
One of the things that the university is doing, which I think is great, is there's a big focus with our colleges and our faculty about their responsibility to be those good samples and good stewards beyond their academic curriculum. And so they're going to be asked, well, they're required to wear masks as well, but they're kind of asked to set that good example. And the number of contacts that students have with our faculty are, hundreds times more than any of our staff. So we believe that's a place that we can make a big impact. And as we do that, none of the faculty want to wear anything because it's very constricting, but they're starting to agree and realize the importance of the big picture, not just for them. They're very concerned about getting things from a student. So one of the things that we've done is created kind of a 10-foot buffer between students and faculty. And we're thinking about like an 8-foot piece of plexiglass, say 8 by 10, that's off to the side of a classroom that allows faculty and students to get close to one another and talk about anything prior to or after classes, which is one of the big things they're concerned about, is that student connection programmatically. So, the classroom situation is a place, I think, to set that stage of proper behavior.
That's good. And that really does tie nicely to what folks are also talking about in the chat, which I thought was really terrific. One person said, you can't go to class without a shirt or shoes. I thought that was an excellent point. I mean, there's certain things that we, and it probably goes back to culture and that whole idea that you two have talked about beautifully. They also suggested orientations for new students could really help with reorienting what we're looking for out of a freshman student, for example. So I thought that was really a good point. I'm going to take us back to these buses again. Someone had mentioned that the bus drivers can certainly enforce whether you can get on the bus or not, for example, if you don't have on a mask. And that if you're using rear door boarding, that really sort of prevents the contact with the driver to be able to manage that. And that does make good sense and understandable. So put that into your thinking, the two of you, when you're talking about limiting the amount of passengers on buses, which I think you have done a really good job of addressing. But I wanted to take us to considerations for bus stops. I know on Big Ten they talked about pavilions, and some don't have pavilions. But do you have any sense of what's happening in terms of bus stops?
Do you want me to go first?
Yeah, Adam, I'm sorry. I didn't.
No, you're good. You're good.
And I didn't say that. Thank you.
So two things. So our bus stops in particular, they will have additional wipe down. So at most of the bus stops, they have a trash receptacle there, and then obviously signage for the routes. So we're also going to take the opportunity to add additional signage pertaining to COVID-19 measures. Maybe have information in there about what their experience will be like on the bus, so that as they're standing there waiting for the bus, they can see either a quick diagram or some information to give them an idea about what the experience will be like getting on the bus. So that's where we're at with shelters. We talked a little bit about the stations, if you will, that have more than 1 or 2 buses that wait and have a public restroom. The partnership between our custodial team on campus with our city bus operators and partnering together to try to keep a safe, clean space as much as possible. And then lastly, with the Big Ten group, we actually had a conversation around not putting the bus operator in the position of an officer, so to speak, of who gets on their bus and who doesn't. And so it was more about informing rather than enforcing. And so, you know, time will tell on how that plays out. Thankfully, we've got another month and a half or so, and our bus operators are operating in our city, and they're learning, right? They're learning on what passengers actually do wear the mask, etc. But during the call last week, since they've been operating for a couple weeks now, all passengers have abided by the masks. The operators are provided with additional masks. So if a passenger just doesn't have one, depending on their social economic situation, then the operators are providing them with a mask so that, you know, they can ride the bus, get to work, whatever they need to do with their life, and then also obviously to keep that environment on the bus as safe as we possibly can. So that's kind of how we framed that particular topic.
Very good. Jody, you want to add to that?
Adam just described the same thing at Iowa. I think
good.
I'd only add that every bus driver at Iowa is a student. And that's a real big reason why we're not going to be asking that student to enforce anything. Again, back to the student is, I think, going to be asked, hey, and we're all, as employees, going to be, if you don't see someone with a mask, you're going to politely remind them, and that's it. And you know, that's the approach they're taking.
Okay, very good. So I do have, someone said that they're providing their entire institution, it was Florida Tech, providing their entire institution with cloth masks on the university logos on them. So now we're moving to pretty darn good marketing. And I think that may be, I know Penn State's doing that as well. So this will be very interesting to see how it becomes a fashion statement instead of something else. So that's good. And then there will be those, so maybe the two of you, that this is a tough one because this is absolutely correct. There will be those with asthma or COPD, et cetera, that wearing a mask is really problematic. So we will have some where that's a medical reason, and how we protect them from others that will not necessarily understand that. That's going to be difficult. I don't know if either one of you want to even touch that, because we're still learning here. Either one of you, Adam? You?
I was waiting for Joe. Absolutely. If there's a medical reason, the mask is not required. And we've talked about that within our facilities workforce itself. And so alternative PPEs, I don't have them handy in front of me to share with this group on the call, but there are alternatives. Perhaps it's increasing the physical distancing. Now that may be super hard if they're on a crew of 6. So I think for us though, and all of us as leaders, the flexibility during a crisis like this is a requirement. And ultimately, obviously, we want to protect the health and safety of our workforce and of our community as much as we can. And we also want to keep as many people working as possible, because these facilities don't just go to sleep. So I think it's a hard balance. It's a conversation that you approach with curiosity, and then and with heart, and just try to navigate the best. I think each situation is going to be specific to the individual and their needs. And I think that's just how we have to approach it.
That's really good. And Joe, I don't know if you have comments on this, but I did want to highlight that you talked about, and both Joe, Adam, and I talked about this previously, about the leadership needed, and how we will need to lean into this in a way that is as positive as possible, and thinking about it from that standpoint. And I do agree that was really important. Joe, did you want to add to that?
Well, much like the chat, the University of Iowa is providing a package for everybody, not just one type, but they're actually getting disposable cloth and face shields for everyone. And the face shield is being recommended for people that have high contacts, such as faculty, because even in a mask, your eyes aren't protected. and it's very difficult to see. And you know, the mask moves around. And then the reason for the temporary is because they are easier to breathe. And so there's going to be a percentage of that. What was pretty interesting is our director of purchasing immediately, who was part of our critical incident management team, immediately kind of, I don't use the right avenues she had to reach out to direct suppliers overseas. And we started working on a supply chain management program that has allowed the university to actually get what we need. And having the flexibility in the PPE was critical. And so hopefully that'll help some people that are at further risk.
That's really a great comment, and getting ahead of the curve on PPE and supply chain. We talked about that on town halls way early on and suggested that folks do that. I have a few little questions that I think still need to be addressed rather than going to some of the other stuff that I would have gone to, and that is the use and cleaning for rental fleets. Do either one of you have rental fleets that you're aware of? Are you using the same cleaning standards for them? Joe?
Well, ours is pretty small. In fact, before COVID, we were thinking about kind of decentralizing it a little bit and having fleet sitting all over campus, and it was kind of an automated way of getting a vehicle if you needed it. But under COVID, I don't think that's moving forward.
Okay.
And I don't have any more detail than that.
That's okay. Adam?
Yeah, great to hear you're thinking of the same idea. We also are looking at try to decentralize our fleet and basically allow faculty staff to check out a vehicle on a mobile device, right, and do that whole piece. We have a pretty large 300-400 motor pool vehicle fleet that we use for daily rentals and long-term leases, etc. We've implemented similar cleaning protocols like all of us have for our vehicles. So we've also are providing signage and a little bit of a education pamphlet for anyone that rents out a vehicle from us, so that they kind of understand what their expectation is as a driver and an operator of the vehicle, and the frequent wiping down of the touch points before they return the vehicle. And then our staff do a thorough clean through on it. For our motor pool vehicles that our facilities staff are using, same kind of thing, providing the sanitation wipes, etc., for them to do a thorough cleaning for their own vehicles. So that's how we're approaching that, really relying upon each individual to be as diligent as they can.
Excellent. So I have just a little more time, and it's around how you're controlling the pedestrian flow for doors that you don't want folks to utilize. I know lots of institutions are struggling with in and out and the codes associated with them. Any quick comments that either of you want to make about that pedestrian flow portion?
Yeah, I guess I'll start real quick on that. We are not policing to a point where if a faculty member still wants to use a certain entry, we're allowing that to happen. Our biggest concern is the big student population. And with the proper signage and coloring, if it's going to be communicated that if there's not a green or red, then try to find the green one and follow your circulation path through that. If it's not noted, we suggest not using it. But we're not enforcing.
Okay.
Especially if you think about service to a building, there's just a lot to deal with there.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And Adam, you'll get the last say on that, and I'm going to go to close.
Well, you're going to close quick because, sorry, team, I don't have the information on that one.
Okay, very good. Yeah, I am going to close because we have a slide that highlights our newest professional development offerings. It's a summer series. You can find it on our continuous learning series tab on our website. They are both live delivery and then available for 45 days out. We're very proud to announce this, and it will be for the facilities professional on the go. and they will address topical areas, technical aspects of operations, team culture, and a whole lot more. We do have a continuing request for reopening guidance documents for posting, a standing call for images on COVID-19 engagement, a slide of our available resources, and then a save the date for this July 10th. Remember, not next Friday, as we are taking a holiday break. Challenges for auxiliary services, dorms, dining, and unions. Through these town halls, your colleagues have armed you with an incredible amount of information and insight. No one person has all the answers. No one institution has the solution. Together, we can help our institutions find answers, solutions, and their best reopening path. Bill Gates said yesterday, the world needs our leadership and coordination. Your institution needs your leadership and coordination. Thank you so much for joining us, and we will be back at this on July 10th. Thank you to our presenters, and have a great weekend.
Thank you.